Buenos días a todos. Efectivamente, como María Andrea estaba diciendo, vamos a concentrarnos en el protocolo de Cartagena, con el cual tal vez muchos de ustedes ya estén familiarizados. Este hijito del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica, los que asistieron a nuestro primer webinar recordarán que el convenio es el tratado madre, los protocolos son regulaciones posteriores que adoptan las partes. En este caso, esta regulación nace del tratado mismo, en el artículo 19.3 del Convenio de Cartagena, del Convenio de Biodiversidad. Ustedes encuentran esta obligación que tienen las partes de desarrollar una reglamentación sobre lo que en ese momento, recuerden, estamos en 1992, era una tecnología que parecía algo muy extraño, muy futurista, no se sabía bien qué era, y una de las delegaciones más vocales en el sentido de que esa nueva tecnología de los organismos vivos genéticamente modificados podía llegar a tener efectos adversos en la biodiversidad fue Malasia. Y Malasia insistió mucho, repito, en que dentro del convenio quedara esta obligación de desarrollar una reglamentación posterior en materia de transgénicos. Y ustedes ven en el texto del protocolo que básicamente todo está basado en el principio de precaución. El principio de precaución es un principio muy del corazón de los ambientalistas que básicamente dice que a pesar de no tener certeza científica sobre que una actividad pueda causar un daño, se puede, no obstante, adoptar medidas para eventualmente prevenir ese daño. Entonces, todo el protocolo de Cartagena se basa en eso, en el principio de precaución. No había ningún tipo de certeza científica de si esta nueva tecnología iba a tener un impacto adverso en la biodiversidad o en la salud humana. Sin embargo, repito, se dice porque algunos tenían un gran temor, como ustedes pueden ver ahí, la creciente preocupación pública, dice el preámbulo, pero siempre insistiendo en que ese daño hasta ahora no se conocía y era puramente una posibilidad. Entonces, fíjense la redacción del artículo primero, regular los OVMs, los organismos vivos genéticamente modificados, porque pueden llegar a tener un impacto adverso. Lo repito, el lenguaje del protocolo dejó eso muy claro. ¿Y cuál es la obligación la obligación que adquieren las partes en el protocolo, las partes del protocolo de Cartagena? Básicamente que si yo soy un país exportador de transgénicos, debo solicitarle a la autoridad nacional competente del país importador el consentimiento informado previo. Piensen ustedes que esta herramienta, que de hecho tiene roces serios con la Organización Mundial del Comercio, porque para la Organización Mundial del Comercio estos PIC que existen en otros acuerdos multilaterales ambientales como el Convenio de Basilea y otros son trabas al comercio, lo consideran una restricción por lo menos al comercio. ¿Por qué? Porque fíjense, los países deben designar una autoridad nacional competente para el protocolo de Cartagena. Como ustedes saben, o algunos de ustedes saben, en el caso de Colombia, esa autoridad nacional competente es el ICA, para organismos transgénicos de uso agrícola y pecuario, el INVIMA, el Ministerio de Salud, si es un transgénico para uso en salud, y el Ministerio de Ambiente, si es un transgénico para un uso ambiental. Entonces, cada país debe designar esta autoridad nacional competente. Y la autoridad nacional competente del país exportador le debe solicitar, repito, al país importador su consentimiento informado previo. O sea, dígame si sí quiere el transgénico y base su decisión en esto. La I es un análisis de riesgo, básicamente es lo que tiene que hacer el exportador, y esa solicitud en principio debe ser previa. No es que allá le mandé, sino previamente al movimiento pedir ese consentimiento. Otras obligaciones importantes del protocolo tienen que ver con que cada 2 años el Estado debe informar En realidad es un formato que se diligencia en donde se pone, por ejemplo, cuántos PIC se han otorgado con respecto a qué OEMs, si hubo algún caso de movimiento no intencional o si hubo algún caso de movimiento ilícito, si tenemos legislación o si se modificó la legislación, si tuvimos alguna dificultad en poder llenar el formulario, es decir, si tuvimos limitaciones en la capacidad para implementar el protocolo. Todo eso se reporta en ese informe bianual. Adicionalmente, tenemos una obligación que es muy importante y que es alimentar una base de datos, se llama el BCH. Esa base de datos es realmente el corazón del protocolo en la medida en que ahí ustedes pueden encontrar información sobre las legislaciones en otros países, sobre si un país le otorgó el PIC a un evento a un determinado evento transgénico o no. Entonces, realmente ese intercambio de información es una de las herramientas claves del protocolo y quien actualmente en Colombia alimenta el BCH es el ICA. Originalmente durante varios años fue el Instituto Humboldt, pero ahora esa responsabilidad le corresponde al ICA. Repito, uno debe mantener al día la información sobre su marco normativo, sobre cuántos PIC ha otorgado, qué tipo de transgénicos cultiva o produce, etc. Adicionalmente, el protocolo también en su momento consideró que era importante que en el futuro se discutiera si esta nueva tecnología tenía algún tipo de consideraciones socioeconómicas que debieran las partes tener en cuenta, regular, discutir. Se dejó eso de manera muy amplia en el artículo 26. Incluyó un artículo, y esto también sistemáticamente lo encuentran en otros tratados, sobre la importancia de crear conciencia en el público, de enseñar lo que es esta tecnología, para qué sirve, sus beneficios, sus riesgos eventuales. Eso es una obligación muy clara, crear conciencia y además invitar al público a que participe en las decisiones en materia de esta tecnología. Para que tengan una idea, en la Unión Europea hay una medida muy robusta en cuanto a la participación del público. El equivalente en la Unión Europea del Acuerdo de Escazú se llama la Convención de Aarhus, que es la que exige para los países europeos el acceso a la información, la participación en las decisiones ambientales y el acceso a la justicia. Y ahí en la Convención de Aarhus incluyeron recientemente una enmienda en la que exigen una consulta a toda la gente de los países de la Unión Europea si se va a liberar en el mercado un transgénico. Entonces, son enfoques distintos que las partes pueden adoptar para cumplir con ese artículo de la concienciación y participación del público. También hay un artículo sobre identificación, el artículo 18, en donde básicamente lo que se discutía era, bueno, necesitamos que de alguna manera sí viene, se identifique cuando un organismo es transgénico para diferenciarlo del convencional. En cuanto a los órganos, y recuerden los que ya han estado en la otra serie de webinars, que estos tratados establecen estas instancias a través de las cuales se implementan las obligaciones del tratado. Y la principal, el máximo órgano decisorio, en este caso se llama la MOP. Para el convenio se llama la COP, por eso la reunión de Cali es la COP16, pero en Cali también se va a reunir la MOP 11 del Protocolo de Cartagena. Importante porque eso ustedes no lo han visto en la formación que ha circulado, en la prensa, etcétera. Se ha concentrado mucho en la COP16, que es el máximo órgano decisorio de la convención, pero tengan en cuenta que también va a haber una reunión de la MOP, es la sesión número 11 del Meeting of the Parties, eso quiere decir MOP, es la reunión de las partes del protocolo. La secretaría es la misma que ya conocemos, la Secretaría del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica en Montreal, a la cual acaba de llegar una nueva cabeza. Astrid Schumacher de Alemania se posesionó recientemente como la nueva secretaria ejecutiva. Los órganos subsidiarios. Estas instancias que ocurrieron en junio en Nairobi, María Andrea estuvo ahí, y que son las encargadas de preparar estas recomendaciones que se van a discutir en la COP. Ahí les recomiendo mucho para los que tienen un interés específico en los temas de la COP, que revisen las recomendaciones que salieron de Nairobi, del SOPSTA en Nairobi, sobre el protocolo de Cartagena. Son básicamente 3 sobre los temas que más adelante va a abordar Felicity: biología sintética, evaluación de riesgo y identificación de, y detección de OMs. Entonces ahí ustedes pueden tener una idea muy clara mirando a esos textos, qué es lo que se va a discutir en Cali con respecto a este tema, a los temas relevantes para el protocolo de Cartagena. Recuerden que cuando ven corchetes, estas paréntesis cuadradas, quiere decir que no hay acuerdo, y van a notar que en esas recomendaciones todavía hay varios puntos que requieren una mayor discusión y sobre los cuales no hay consenso todavía. También bajo el protocolo son relevantes el grupo de trabajo sobre evaluación de riesgo, que como su nombre lo indica, se encarga de estudiar y de discutir a fondo ese tema, que ya mencionamos en el contexto del PIC, y el grupo de trabajo sobre biología sintética, que si bien no está propiamente bajo el protocolo, es relevante en este contexto. También quería destacar aquí que el protocolo tiene dientes, tiene un comité de cumplimiento, o sea, una respuesta qué pasa si no cumplo. Yo este año finalizo, he estado 16 años en este órgano por diferentes razones, soy miembro, somos 3 por región. ¿Y qué hacemos? Básicamente verificamos que esas obligaciones de las que estábamos hablando, por ejemplo, que los países efectivamente envíen sus informes cada 2 años, o que efectivamente tengan marco normativo, o que hayan designado puntos focales, porque el protocolo exige no solamente la designación de una autoridad nacional competente, sino exige también, por ejemplo, un punto focal para los casos en que puede haber un movimiento no intencional. Y en ese sentido es el tipo de obligaciones que nosotros revisamos que efectivamente los países estén cumpliendo. Sé que la pregunta en la mente de todos es, bueno, ¿y qué pasa si un país no está cumpliendo? Estos mecanismos de cumplimiento son principalmente facilitadores, no punitivos, no confrontacionales. Es decir, no es que vaya a derivarse una sanción. Esa palabra incluso está ultra prohibida en el lenguaje de las negociaciones multilaterales en el marco de los tratados. Las partes prefieren hablar de consecuencias al incumplimiento porque, repito, la función principal, hay alguien con el micrófono prendido, si les agradezco si lo apagan. Les decía que la función principal del comité de cumplimiento es facilitar el cumplimiento. Entonces, ¿qué hacemos? Básicamente, oye, he notado que llevas 6 años sin presentar tu informe bianual. O he notado que en tu informe bianual hay una inconsistencia con la base de datos de la OCDE. O puede ser, oye, no, esta es la hora, 20 y pico de años después, que todavía no tienes marco normativo. Entonces, ese es el tipo de cosas que hacemos. Abordar a la parte, contactarla, decirle qué te hace falta, qué requieres, qué necesitas. Y no subestimen eso, porque realmente el solo hecho de contactar a la parte como comité de cumplimiento y decirle, mira, estamos revisando y no has cumplido con esta obligación desde hace ya varios años, tiene un efecto disuasivo enorme. Es decir, se los puedo decir con toda el conocimiento del caso, el solo hecho de contactar a la parte y decirle la máxima consecuencia del incumplimiento es nombrar y avergonzar, decirle a la MOP, señores MOP, hemos determinado que estos países no están en situación de cumplimiento, y nombrar a esos países tiene un efecto poderosísimo en el contexto del multilateralismo en general y de los tratados ambientales en particular. Entonces, si bien, repito, no podemos imponer sanciones, el solo hecho de señalar con el dedo, nombrar y avergonzar, nombrar en la MOP un país incumplido tiene un efecto disuasivo enorme y promueve el cumplimiento. Importante anotar que el protocolo no excluye, es decir, el protocolo excluye textualmente los farmacéuticos para humanos, los OEMs cuando están en tránsito y el uso confinado. ¿Qué quiere decir eso? Que para esas tres categorías no se requiere el consentimiento informado previo, no se requiere el PIC. Entonces, repito, farmacéuticos para humanos, ¿por qué? El mismo protocolo lo dice, porque eso está cubierto por la Organización Mundial de la Salud. Tránsito, porque se consideró que no era necesario, a diferencia, por ejemplo, del Convenio de Basilea sobre desechos peligrosos, donde ahí sí se exige el PIC para el tránsito. Y uso confinado, porque como su nombre lo indica, si no hay una posibilidad real de liberación del transgénico, pues se consideró que no era necesario el PIC. Y ahora, en estos minuticos que me quedan, 2 minuticos simplemente para destacar que Colombia tuvo un rol realmente importante en la negociación del protocolo. En su momento, el protocolo se debía haber adoptado en Cartagena en 1999, sin embargo, no fue posible, porque imagínense ustedes la polarización entre aquellos que no conocían esta tecnología de qué trataba, que todavía era algo muy nuevo, que tenían como es decir, había una ignorancia muy grande sobre las bondades de los transgénicos, también sobre los riesgos de los transgénicos, y aquellos que los estaban desarrollando, los países en donde esto ya era una tecnología muy expandida, como Argentina, como Chile, como en su momento Uruguay, Estados Unidos, Canadá, Australia. Entonces, se creó, repito, un choque grande con respecto a varios puntos del protocolo y esa negociación que debía haber culminado en Cartagena finalmente fracasó en ese momento y el protocolo no se adopta sino un año después en Montreal, en el año 2000. Gracias, hay que decirlo en gran medida, al liderazgo que asumió el ministro Mayer, a quien ven ustedes aquí en la foto en el momento de la firma, junto con Cristian Samper y conmigo, en el momento en que se firmó el protocolo de Cartagena y se le llamó así a pesar de no haber sido adoptado en Cartagena como un reconocimiento al liderazgo del ministro Mayer. Los ositos que seguramente muchos se estarán preguntando qué hacen ahí es porque Mayer se ingenió una cantidad de formas de romper el hielo, de cambiar estas negociaciones que hicieron historia y que pues no tenemos tiempo de detallar aquí, pero que en su momento involucraron también a unos ositos de peluche. Entonces, por eso el protocolo se llama de Cartagena como un homenaje a la delegación colombiana y al ministro Mayer, a pesar de no haber sido adoptado en Cartagena. También quería destacar muy rápidamente que el protocolo tiene un hijito, es decir, viene siendo un nietecito del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica. Es un protocolo que responde a la pregunta ¿qué pasa si ocurre un daño? También esa obligación estaba en el protocolo de Cartagena. Regulen qué pasa si ese daño se materializa. Fue una negociación larga y compleja que estuvo a cargo de mi colega del Reino de los Países Bajos, René Lefebvre, y yo, quienes copresidimos esa negociación durante más de 6 años y que culminó con la adopción en el 2010 de este protocolo suplementario de Nagoya Kuala Lumpur, que ya entró en vigor, del cual Colombia es parte y que esperemos que nunca se tenga que usar, porque este protocolo solo va a ser relevante en el momento en que llegara a materializarse un daño a la biodiversidad o a la salud humana ocasionado por un OVM. Entonces, fíjense, si nunca hay que usarlo, pues mejor todavía. Es como una herramienta legal, una responsabilidad administrativa en caso de que ese daño se materialice. El protocolo tiene varios temas que no aborde en detalle porque Felicity les va a contar más sobre eso. Quería simplemente comentar que la agenda, por lo menos lo que se llama el programa provisional, está disponible en la página del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica. Lo que todavía no está disponible y es más interesante es lo que se conoce como el programa provisional anotado, que son estos mismos temas que ustedes ven listados ahí, pero con un pequeño párrafo en que nos cuentan, bueno, cómo se pretenden abordar, qué se va a utilizar. Y aquí les dejo la lista simplemente para que si tienen preguntas, las podamos abordar más de cerca una vez Felicity termine su presentación. Entonces, with that, Felicity, oh, no, sorry, I just wanted to, solo quería mostrar esta diapositiva finalmente antes de darle paso a Felicity y es pues, digamos, perdón, la perdí, era simplemente para que vean, no, creo que la perdí. Bueno, era simplemente para mostrarles los principales temas, pero creo que Felicity ya les va a hablar de eso en más detalle. Gracias.
Jimena, muchas gracias a ti. Así que paso rápidamente a presentar a Felicity. Para los que tengan preguntas, no olviden que tienen un Q&A en la parte inferior de sus pantallas donde pueden escribir las preguntas. Y Felicity va a hacer su presentación en inglés, pero tenemos también una traducción simultánea que si van a la parte de abajo de sus pantallas hay un globito donde pueden elegir el idioma que quieran escuchar la presentación, en el que quieran escuchar la presentación. Entonces, Felicity, good morning. My pleasure to have you here. Let me introduce you in Spanish and then we will start. Felicity Kuiper es graduada en Ciencias Biológicas y Biomédicas con PhD en Agricultura y máster en Derecho Ambiental Internacional. Ha trabajado en biotecnología agrícola durante más de 20 años, con 16 años en temas de asuntos regulatorios en el sector privado. Fue investigadora postdoctoral en patología de plantas moleculares, trabajaba predominantemente en políticas regulatorias con un enfoque en desarrollos en el derecho internacional que pueden impactar en las actividades de investigación y desarrollo en la biotecnología, desde la regulación de nuevas biotecnologías y establecimiento desde el acceso y la distribución de beneficios. Felicity ha sido parte por muchos años en las negociaciones también del Protocolo de Cartagena como observadora y conoce muy bien toda la historia de estas nuevas tecnologías que pueden tener algún impacto en el sector agropecuario. Así que, welcome Felicity, our pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for that introduction, and please do let me know if you cannot hear me properly or see I have a slide showing now. So thank you for the introduction and good morning to everybody. And thank you also to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about this topic this morning. And I will begin with what synthetic biology is. So I'll go through some of the definitions and examples of current areas of research and commercial products. Then I will go into developments under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And so I have been involved in these for quite a long time now. It's more than 15 years. So I will give a detailed overview of what has happened, and also we'll go into what will be negotiated at COP16, the upcoming COP16 in Cali. And I will also talk about a parallel program of work under the Cartagena Protocol. So this is on risk assessment for a specific type of application of a technology that is considered to be synthetic biology. And that is going to be negotiated also in Cali at COP11. So COP11 for the protocol, as well as the COP for the Nagoya Protocol, will be concurrent meetings with COP16. So what is synthetic biology? So this is a term that is not new. It can be found in older literature, but it started to appear more often after or from around 2010. And this coincided with a publication that received a lot of attention. This was a 2010 publication in the Science Journal, which detailed the design of a bacterial chromosome. So this was using a computer, and this was chemically synthesized and introduced into a bacterial cell, which then behaved normally. It had normal phenotypic properties. And so this was the first report of doing something like that successfully. So there was a lot of media attention about this article and a lot of like sensational language, like this man-made life. It was really hyped as a fundamental change with what was possible with biotechnology. And this triggered a lot of policy discussion around, are there new capabilities in biotechnology and do we need more regulatory rules? So these discussions were happening in the countries where this kind of work, research was happening. And then we started to see this emerge at the international level. And while there has been a lot of discussion about it, we don't actually have an agreed definition. This is always the first question, what is synthetic biology? We still don't have a clear definition for this. And it's quite complex as to why, and I hope I can get across some of the tensions here in this presentation. So the term is not always used either. In a lot of the discussions I have with governments and policymakers, the predominant term is biotechnology, because that is the term that is used in a lot of national regulatory frameworks. And more recently in the scientific community, I'm seeing a shift from synthetic biology to other things like engineering biology or bioengineering. Generally, they can all be thought of as having been pretty much the same thing or having a lot of overlap with one another. But in essence, a lot of these are not too different from the much older, from the last generation, definitions of biotechnology. And what we see in these common elements around design, redesign, manufacture, modification of living organisms, of biological systems, biological pathways. And sometimes we see components and systems, and these are, the parts that are assembled in a synthetic biology application. But the definition that I tend to like is this one at the bottom of the slide.
Felicity, may I bother you? We are just
Sure.
seeing the first slide. Are you moving the presentation?
Oh, I am, yes.
We just see the first slide and not the next ones. No, this is the agenda, yeah. Sorry to disturb you.
You're seeing the agenda now?
Yes, we are in the second slide. Seems like, do you have a double screen or something like that?
No, I don't.
We just see the second slide. You are in the second slide. Now you are in the first one.
Do you see the agenda now?
Yes.
Is that showing as a full screen?
No.
No, because when I present it, it's not put it in presentation mode. Are you seeing agenda in presentation mode?
No.
No.
I can see the other slides in the left side.
Okay. Would you be able to present them, Maria?
Yes, I can do it.
Yeah.
Let me then.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
That might overcome, because I'm not sure why it's happening.
Don't worry. Then I will share them, and you just let me know when I have to.
Okay.
Go to the next. Okay, let me do it. Here you go.
Okay, thank you. So I've gone through the agenda. I've done this one. So next, please.
Okay.
And I've talked about click through 2 times. And one more. Okay, so this is where I'm up to here. So I was talking about the definition from artificial intelligence. So this slide has a list of definitions that have been published by various sources. There's sort of advisory agencies and scientific communities of governments. There's scientific institutions like the Royal Society and the CSIRO, policy making forum with the World Economic Forum, and at the bottom we have a definition proposed by artificial intelligence, and I think it provides a good summary of the three of the list, because it's a bit higher level. It's the application of engineering principles to biology, allowing for the design and construction of new biological systems with properties or functions that do not occur in nature. And what's I like about this is it captures that purpose. It's to develop something to do something that does not occur in nature. So next, please. So the examples that I am presenting here are have been labelled as synthetic biology by the developers or by the companies that sell the commercial product. And so here, most synthetic biology applications are microbial. So there are many examples of biosynthesis, and there are many commercial products that are available. So this is where a microbial cell is designed as a factory to produce a chemical, and that chemical is itself a product, or it's an ingredient of a product. So these are chemicals, they're not GMOs, but the microbe that has been used to produce it may be a GMO, and these are cultured in bioreactors, so they're in containment and they're not released into the environment. There are also, as shown on the bottom of the slide, there are also commercial applications, so commercial microbial applications that are used in the environment. So there are a number of a few products that are commercialized in the United States, and there's also an area of research into other types of applications. Next slide, please. And with animals, the examples I'm presenting here, they have been referred to as synthetic biology by the research communities that are working in these areas. There are active areas of conservation research, for example, projects for de-extinction. These get quite a lot of media attention and capture the public interest. There's an example on the slide there of the Tasmanian tiger, which is a current project where I live in Australia. There's celebrities throwing money at funding this to bring back this animal. There are also animal conservation applications and public health applications that rely on gene drive technology. And this is quite a prominent technology in the synthetic biology discussions under the convention. You've probably heard about the potential application of engineered gene drives for controlling mosquitoes that are vectors of malaria and other human diseases. So this has been quite controversial under the convention, and there have been campaigns for moratoria on this entire area of technology development. Next slide, please. So on plants, it's a bit harder to point to specific examples because it's less new. It's an area that's less new. Plants, genetically modified plants, have been released into the environment for longer than the Cartagena Protocol has existed. So the examples on the slide, these are examples that have been raised in the discussions under the convention. And generally speaking, the term has been applied to anything that is not a GM herbicide tolerant or insect resistant crop. So these have been these are something from the past. They've been relabeled as traditional GMOs or LMOs or first generation GM crops. So this distinction in the plant world is a little bit different to what we're seeing with the microbes and the animals, where these are applications that are more recent, at least commercial applications for microbes. So using this distinction, doesn't make a lot of sense for these examples on the slide. So for example, canola that's on this slide, you may know of it as oilseed rape. This was in development for more than 30 years, and uses older transgenic technology. So this product has been assessed in the typical manner of a GM crop. So using existing regulatory frameworks, it's just a different type of trait to some of the older GM crops that are currently commercial. Similarly, the genome editing as a whole has been labelled as synthetic biology in the discussions under the convention, but the way in which it is used in plants, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It typically involves small mutations that could occur in nature or through conventional plant breeding, or it can be used for transgenesis, and in which case it remains within the scope of existing regulatory frameworks for GMOs. So these applications in plants don't really compare to the complexity of for example, of that bacterial cell and the type of technology that was used there in that publication from 2010. Examples that might be getting a bit closer to this include sort of contained applications. So this is where plants are used in a similar way as microbes to produce a chemical, to produce a substance, and there are commercial examples of vaccines and antibodies that have been produced this way. Next slide, please. So in parallel to all of this technological development, there have been policy discussions in several areas at national, regional, and international levels. So these include the areas of biodiversity and biosafety, which are in the scope of the Convention and the Cartagena Protocol. And within those, there's been a lot of discussion around whether or not existing regulatory frameworks remain adequate, and especially in regard to risk assessment methodologies for the types of organisms that might be developed. And I've just talked about planned examples where these existing frameworks have been shown to be adequate. And an emerging area here is the implications of artificial intelligence across, it's not unique to synthetic biology. It's a big discussion in many areas of technological development at the moment. And this is a topic that may come up at COP16. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to move on to the details of the discussions under the convention. And this is the primary international forum that is discussing these questions around the adequacy of regulation. So a lot of the content of programs of work over time have been aimed at sort of pulling that apart and really investigating, is there a new issue that we need to be dealing with in a different way? Next slide, please. So the convention, Jimeno has provided some of the background. So I'm skipping over sort of the basics of the convention and its objectives, and that the Cartagena Protocol is a subsidiary agreement under that. So the convention requires its parties to regulate the environmental risks associated with the release of LMOs, or living modified organisms, which in practice means the same as GMOs, which tends to be used in national regulatory frameworks. And these are organisms that are developed using biotechnology, and this is defined as any technological application that uses biological systems, living organisms, or derivatives thereof to make or modify products or processes for specific uses. So you might notice that this is quite similar to the synthetic biology, the various synthetic biology definitions that I talked about earlier. And the convention provides for a protocol in one of its articles, and from that we have the Cartagena Protocol on biodiversity, biosafety rather, which entered into force 10 years after the convention, and it recently had its 20th anniversary. So the cornerstone of the protocol is that it sets out fundamental principles and general methodology for risk assessment, and that much of that is in Annex 3, and it also sets out decision-making processes, and these are reflected in national regulatory frameworks for LMOs, GMOs. Next slide, please. So until that publication in 2010, the discussions under the convention were all about biotechnology. The term biotechnology was used. We saw that change from 2011. And the first discussions on synthetic biology were in the context of whether or not it is a new and emerging issue with relevance to the objectives of the convention. And so there is a process for identifying new and emerging issues. There are criteria that are set out in a COP decision that are supposed to be addressed. So this forms quite a structured assessment. So when the COP, the Conference of the Parties to the Convention, it usually meets every 2 years. It considers the implementation of the Convention, but also issues relevant to it, and that includes these new and emerging issue proposals. And so it has addressed that question over the years. It has also addressed several others, including how to define it, the potential positive and negative implications for the objectives of the CBD, the convention and its protocols, whether or not the regulatory provisions of the convention and the protocol remain adequate, and if there could be organisms developed using these new technologies that might fall outside the scope, so outside the definition of LMO, and if there is a need to establish an ongoing process for monitoring developments in synthetic biology. So the last point is in bold because this is a current area of debate. So next slide, please. So an outcome of this work is an operational definition from an RTEG, an ad hoc technical expert group. And this was the first RTEG of several on this topic. But the parties deliberated this in COP13 in 2016, Bear with me, it's quite late at night for me. Might mix up my numbers. But the parties did not agree to this. It was not officially adopted or agreed to. However, it is often presented as though it is the operational definition. It's not official. And what is evident in this forum, and I alluded to this with the plan examples, is that there is a distinction drawn that's really about a point in time rather than technology development or regulatory gaps. And this point in time is when the Cartagena Protocol was adopted. So it has been argued that the protocol was drafted to manage the biotechnology that existed at the time. So this is through the 1990s and early 2000s. And it didn't really envision what would come after that. So these developments post-2020 have been given a new name, so synthetic biology, and it has been argued that they are so different, so novel, that they bring new risks and they bring and that require new regulatory rules. And this is really what is at the heart of the debate under the convention. It does not correspond with the science, which is more of a continuum of development. There's no clear point where we stopped using older biotech and started using new biotech. It's more of a continuum. It also doesn't correspond with regulatory reality, which is, as we've experienced with GM crops, the existing regulatory frameworks for GMOs have been adequate to manage these new types of GMOs. So this is why, in my view, we will never be able to settle on a definition, because it isn't really different to what already existed. Next slide, please. So it's not really surprising that a lot of work, a lot of discussion, a lot of time has led to the conclusion that synthetic biology is within the scope of biotechnology as defined by the CBD, and also that most organisms developed remain within the scope of LMO as defined by the Cartagena Protocol. So that means the regulatory provisions remain applicable. There are exceptions where this is not clear, and the main one being genome editing. So at the international level, there is a divergence of views amongst parties whether or not these organisms are LMOs. But at national levels, there are many jurisdictions that have clarified regulatory status, including Colombia several years ago. And those countries generally exclude certain types of edits from the regulatory scope, from the scope of GMO regulation. So here there is a tension between many parties that do not agree that this is genome editing is synthetic biology, or that an international discussion or a decision is needed on this topic. Next slide, please. So getting into the COP decisions. Next slide, please. Yep. The last decision on synthetic biology was at COP15 in 2022. And this included a debate on the unresolved new and emerging issues analysis. This has never been conclusively completed for synthetic biology, and it was decided that it would remain unresolved. And a new area of work was established. So all of that sort of list of questions that I showed earlier, that is now being sort of left behind. And we have a new, completely new area of work, which is focused on horizon scanning. So this is horizon scanning, monitoring and assessment of the most recent technological developments in synthetic biology. And so since that decision, there has been one intersessional cycle of work where a process was defined and it was applied, an abbreviated form applied by an ad hoc technical expert group, an RTEG. I participated in this work. I participated in all of the RTEGs on synthetic biology. And the outcome of this work was reviewed by the recent subsidiary body on scientific, technical and technological advice at its 26th meeting in May. And this is the meeting in Nairobi that Jimena referred to. So that produced recommendations, and these will form the basis for the COP16 negotiations, where a decision will be made on future work on the topic. So next slide, please. So this recommendation is quite a long document. It's heavily bracketed, which means a lot of the text will need to be negotiated and resolved at COP16. And so there are three main areas. The first is Section A, which includes the calls for the development of a thematic action plan on capacity building and development. This was not so contentious. A lot of that text is clean. The second area is Section B, which was very contentious. And then the third area is on the terms of reference for an RTEG, which I go into on the next slide. But before that, please go back, sorry. Before that, I'll talk a bit about Section B, which was, this was a real battleground at Substern. It probably will be at COP16 as well. And this was around how the outcomes of that first cycle of horizon scanning should be received, whether or not it should be continued into another cycle or not continued at all, and what to do with the RTEG. So there's general agreement on things like convening online discussions, updating a literature review that was done in this cycle to support whatever work does go ahead. Next slide, please. So with the RTEG terms of reference, again, highly bracketed text, very messy with lots of things thrown in it. And it wasn't really, it's been left in quite a messy state because there wasn't time to return to it to negotiate it further at Subster. 4 general areas here, highly summarising what's there, including returning to those outstanding issues of the definition and the new and emerging issues analysis. So we're coming back to that after sort of many years of not resolving those. Also, continuing the assessment part, like doing a deeper assessment, the assessment part of the horizon scanning process on some of the topics that are identified in the current cycle. And here there's quite a bit of interest around artificial intelligence, also around identifying benefits. And this is the context of contributing to achieving the objectives of the convention, as well as the global biodiversity framework. This is a very big policy area for parties at the moment. And to provide advice on capacity building and development needs. This would contribute to that plan of action in Section A. So next slide, please. So our preferred outcomes here are that future work on synthetic biology does focus on things like a capacity building and development action plan and areas where there is real need, where that will provide useful information for governments for implementing the convention and the global biodiversity framework. We have this view because we have invested, as a lot of parties have as well, a lot of time in this topic over many years. It is quite resource intensive work. But the output is not really justifying this. It's not justifying the continuation of all of these processes. No major biosafety issues have been identified, but a recurring theme, parties are constantly calling for enablement, being able to adopt biotechnology, the capacity development, so that they can realise the potential benefits. So we therefore support the proposal in Section A. With Section B, we think that much of this could be deleted. We do not believe that the horizon scanning process should be continued in its current form or with an RTEG. If it is to be continued, there are other processes that could be used to do this, without an RTEG. So these programs of work typically involve online discussions, inviting submissions of information. There could be updated literature review as already recommended. And all of this could be synthesized by the secretariat or by a contractor. And that is an updated cycle of horizon scanning. And if a new issue is identified through that process, there is the new and emerging issues analysis process, which can be used. Next slide, please. If an RTEG is to be continued, it should be re-established. It really needs to have some new membership here, especially with greater representation by the scientific community. There are many members of the RTEG, including myself, that have been there for 10 years. It really needs to have an injection of some new people. And those terms of reference should support that section A, providing advice on capacity building and development needs. It should look into identifying those benefits potential benefits towards achieving the 3 objectives of the Convention and the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And if there's a strong desire from parties, they could revisit that definition and the new and emerging issues analysis. On that area of artificial intelligence, where there's quite a bit of, I've heard from governments, there's some interest there. A study could be commissioned there, but it needs to be framed around implications for the objectives of the Convention. Next slide, please. So we'll move on to developments under the Cartagena Protocol, where there is a parallel program of work on risk assessment. Next slide, please. So at COP10 in 2022, the parties to the protocol decided to establish a new program of work to develop additional voluntary guidance materials. So this is additional to many resources that already exist to support risk assessment in accordance with that Annex 3 of the protocol for LMOs containing engineered gene drives. So they considered both LMOs containing engineered gene drives and LM-FISH, but decided to defer LM-FISH to COP11. So that is on the agenda for COP11. So this program of work involved another RTEG. I was involved in this RTEG too. And we managed to develop these additional voluntary guidance materials, a full document with a focus on mosquitoes. And this was presented to the SBSTA meeting that we just had in May. A secondary area of work for this RTEG was also to analyse submissions from parties for other topics that that they have identified as a priority for developing additional voluntary guidance materials. So SBSTA looked at the new guidance document as well as the outcomes of the RTEG with their assessment of other proposals, and that has produced recommendations for the COP decision. So next slide, please. So the SBSTA recommendation for this topic has, it's nowhere near as complicated as a synthetic biology document. It's much easier to read and understand. And for the additional voluntary guidance materials, there is some unresolved text here around how the guidance is to be received. Most parties at SBSTA did support endorsing it as it is, or at least welcoming it and encouraging its use. There was a minority who wanted another intercessional cycle of work to develop it further with a focus on related issues. So these are issues that are more relevant to the decision-making process rather than the risk assessment. And next slide, please. For other potential topics for the development of additional voluntary guidance materials, this is also unresolved, and this is where we return to the question of LM-FISH. This is unresolved around because parties they were split on whether or not this is needed. Similar situation as to COP10. There's also the recommendation that parties be invited to submit their needs and priorities for guidance. This is something to be expected in every COP decision. It's generally included and parties make their submissions. And there is a process for doing this. There are certain criteria that are set out in a decision to sort of provide justification for the proposal. But here there's bracketed text that makes the suggestion that the parties consider submitting a particular topic that has been recommended by the synthetic biology RTEG. So here the synthetic biology RTEG is making recommendations that go to other programs of work under its protocol. So this is for self-limiting insects. This is a type of LM insect. Next slide, please. And this is going into our preferred outcomes, and I promise you I'm very close to near the end of my presentation. So our preferred outcome here, and this is focusing on the text that is not resolved in the decision. Apart from this, it's fine. For additional voluntary guidance materials for LMOs containing engineered gene drives, we support endorsing it, or at least welcoming it, encouraging its use. So we do not believe that it's necessary to have another cycle of development, because those related issues, so issues connected to decision making, they're already included in the guidance document, and at a sort of level of detail that's appropriate. These are things to take into account, but they're not necessarily part of the risk assessment process. Regarding other topics, we do not see the need for this for fish. We the GIC have made, Global Industry Coalition, that's who I represent in these processes. We've made quite detailed submissions prior to COP 10 on why this wasn't necessary, because there is quite an extensive body of work that provide resources relevant to doing risk assessments with these types of organisms. There's also direct regulatory experience for LM fish. And this experience also exists, perhaps to an even greater extent now, for LM insects. So these include self-limiting. These are things like the transgenic mosquitoes that have been released in a number of jurisdictions. So because these resources and experience already exist, we do not find that or consider that these additional materials are necessary. And next slide, please, which is my last slide. I know I have shown a lot of detailed information in a short time. Hopefully I haven't spoken too quickly for translation, but I'm happy to take any questions here. But also I can be contacted at my email address there, and I'll be at COP16. So please feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you.